So welcome. We're glad you're here and stuck around for the worship service today for this forum because our 175th anniversary celebrations are not just about the past and our legacy and that legacy that pushes us forward into the future. It's also about faith formation. It's about spiritual growth. And that's really what we hoped this forum would be today, is a good chance to talk with a special guest about just that, about faith formation and the role of faith in our lives and in the world. So I know pretty much everybody here probably knows Katherine Clark. Let me just do that by way of introduction. Katherine is a member of our Melrose School Committee. No, wait, that's how I first met.
That's right.
Then you were a member of the Massachusetts House of Representatives here in town, then on Beacon Hill, and then state senator on Beacon Hill, and now United States Congresswoman Katherine Clark. I'm so glad you're here today. I know you more as my former neighbor on the street. Because when you lived in Melrose up on Prospect Street, it's just catty corner down from the parsonage, which is down the corner. See you walking your dog around sometimes and chat out on the street. In fact, I remember one time we were walking down the street and I said to my wife, Maureen, "It's Katherine Clark. I'm going to go out and talk to her about such and such." And Maureen said, "Or you could just let her walk her dog." I thought it was good advice, and I'm sure everybody kept accosting us and trying to just do things around town. So, but we, as I said earlier, consider you a member of our church family here. And I remember when you came with your parents when they were still with us. You came with your kids when they were younger. It was a great joy for me to be part of, to officiate Addison's confirmation and baptism here. So maybe a good place to start is just to ask you about your own faith journey. Did you grow up in a particular church, in a particular denomination? What led you here?
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me back. It truly is great. And I just have to give a little shout out to the New Day String Band. That is phenomenal. Thank you for making my week. And I grew up in the Episcopal Church, where my grandmother, who was definitely the matriarch of our family, had a huge role. So she had a very particular seat. I'm named after her, and she was very involved in the Altar Guild and was the unofficial welcoming committee. And I think I blame her for getting into politics because she never worked outside of the home except as Rosie the Riveter in World War II, which she talked about as one of the highlights of her life, being able to feel part of something bigger than her own household and part of an effort together. But I think she misunderstood her role in community and how she was the first person to welcome somebody, and just had for a woman who was born in 1904 and she lived to 102. I think her body just said, okay, we're very tired and you apparently are not slowing down, but she always had a diverse group of friends and people from all over who came through that church. She was the one who really welcomed them and made sure they were included. And so I think she saw herself as having this moment in history in World War II where she was part of something bigger, but she was always part of something bigger and really used her faith and her belief as a way to build community.
And how would you say, how do you think faith can affect our daily lives? What role can it play in it?
Oh, boy. You know, for me, it's that touchstone. As all of us experience, and perhaps more so or not more so in the particular job and this moment in politics, but it is that constant source of optimism, and I hope a prism that we can continue even when it's really, really hard and challenging to look through. Are we living up to those ideals, not just sort of our country's ideals of equality and justice, but are we leading with love? Are we truly, I mean, the scripture choices today, I'm like, did you select these for me? But, that are we seeing those, are we seeing us all as equals and all as God's children? And are you living those values, or are you falling short? And how do we continue to sort of blend our civic and faith lives? I think it is so critical to have that optimism and hope that faith gives us, especially in very challenging and sometimes dangerous times like we are living through now.
It is a challenge. It's always a challenge. And how do you bring our faith out of the sanctuary? And that's where the question came from. Is how do we take our faith out of the sanctuary and into our daily lives? And some of that daily life is civic responsibilities, and that, I think. So, what is the impact or what impact can our faith have on society, on world events, national events, world events? That's where I think it gets challenging.
Yeah.
Because one of the things we've been discussing here in the church and conversations and in forums is Christian nationalism and the rise of that in our country as a way of some people find expressing their faith in that way, which many of us find to be quite dangerous way. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah.
Because then there are those others of us who bring our faith out into the world as a way of expressing compassion, as a way of building people up,
Yeah.
and trying to find unity, whereas that seems to be much more about division.
Yeah, it is. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with, I'm sure many of you are, with Reverend William Barber. I had the great honor of having a Zoom call with him the other day, and he was talking about this and Christian nationalism. And he said, for me, he said, I prefer the term religious nationalism because I don't see the Christianity in there. And he found it so deeply disturbing to link sort of this ideology that we are seeing and we see in many people in Congress. I didn't know there was I'll follow his example, religious nationalist flag until the recent election of Mike Johnson as Speaker. And there is a flag, and just for me, what it stands for are all the things that I think oppose a Christian message of seeing each other as neighbors and doing right by one another, and also understanding that we all fall short, but as you've said so eloquently today, we all live in God's grace. And this idea that we are going to gain power, political advantage by discrimination and building fear and division around very specific groups of people, to me just seems so dangerous and such an abuse of the teachings of Christ. And the readings today about it's the tax collectors and the prostitutes who may get to heaven before any of the rest of us. And how do we fight back against this idea of a religious state and government coming together in a way that is set to divide us. And it has been a very difficult time to watch as the mom of a trans child, to watch these very pointed attacks on trans community, on the LGBTQ community, and deep bigotry that is tossed into bills and legislation that don't have anything to do with it. We have now sort of revamped an earmark project. And we call it community projects, and that's really what they are, and that's sort of the intent of them. So we put a lot of guardrails around them, but they were taken away for a while because they were seen as abusive. Some of you may remember the famous Bridge to Nowhere, and just a way to sort of get money into your districts without that connection of community. So in the last few years, we were able to put these back, and they have to come out of and be a consensus from districts and from working with nonprofits, working with municipalities, and we have some great ones here in MA5, a lot on Earth Day, and making sure that we are building climate resilience. And we had a member of Congress from Maryland this year go into everybody's earmarks, everybody's community projects. And if they were all at all related to the LGBTQ community, they were struck. And these are the quieter bigotries that we deal with. And then there are the very loud ones around. And in every piece of legislation attacking DEI, and it's just this constant putting immigrants out there, and I'm so appreciative of the work that this congregation does with our immigrant community, but putting immigrants out there not as humans, but talking about them as someone other, someone different. When we know from the teachings just this morning that we had reaffirmed that we are all together, all God's children. So how do we, in political life, where we are, social media, we're on television, how do we sort of bring those themes back together and yet also realize that we are all in God's grace and loved? And, it's a constant tension of this work, but I feel the strength of those sort of moral convictions of the Christian faith is something that gives me great strength and hope as we move through it.
I've come to a place where it feels to me like your starting place is what's important. And if your starting place is your faith, as the core of who you are, and I think that's the difference with Christian nationalism, in my view, is that they start with a very, very right-wing politic and bring their faith to that, rather than the other way around. Like, if you start with your faith and bring your faith to politics, you'll get a much more compassionate politics than if you start with politics and then yank your faith over there to match that.
Yeah.
I think that's where the danger was. You're starting from the wrong place. You're not starting from a place of faithfulness. You're starting from a place of hatred and division. And how can I make my faith work for that?
Yeah.
That's dangerous.
I agree.
Going into this election year, let me just ask this, because I know I'm going to pass the microphone around here in just a second, but what do you think the role is of a local church like ours in an election year? Do we just back way out? How do we get involved, or do we get involved, or just leave it alone?
It's all on you. I have to say, nobody else is showing up. It's not a dress rehearsal and we talk so much about democracy being on the ballot, and it is. But it is also all the faith that you bring to your lives that you celebrate here each week, and so much more than what happens here, how you bring this congregation into community. The only way that we meet this moment is neighbor to neighbor. And it is, we will do our part, being out there, raising money, running political campaigns, finding great candidates. But at the end of the day, it comes down to people of good faith, of whatever religion or non-religion they may hold, who come together and see that we are the United States of America, and that means something. And that leading with love is not a weakness, it is a strength, and it's the only way forward. And that caring for the poor, making sure that we continue to build inclusive communities, doesn't come from Washington, it comes from right here. And it builds up and outward. In fact, I think Washington is often the last place of anger and bitterness left as the rest of the country comes to a different place. And that doesn't mean we all vote for the same people or have the same priorities, but that moral clarity that you have here is something we need to continue to engage our friends and neighbors on. It's the only way that we truly build communities of faith and communities of goodwill. And that is the strength and promise of our government, that we are representative of that, and that we are supposed to come from different ideologies, from different parts of the country, different life experiences, and come together and make a better product, and make something that is driven by all of that, to make something that works best for the most people. And we've sort of flipped that around. And we are really, at times in Congress, it feels like we are trying to do the very most for the very privileged few. And we're making that winner circle so small in our country. And you have to be the force that asks the hard questions at forums, that votes with your faith and your belief in your fellow neighbors and community members. And that's how we meet this moment as a country and a world.
I like that line, voting with your faith. Yeah.